what was included in the original Southeast Regional Park bond plan, and then at a very high level, maybe what some options might be for us. I'm going to be handing out a sheet that has on it Southeast Regional Park Working Group. If you're interested in being a part of this subgroup, please sign up, and we'll be forming a group soon. It's going to actually be led by Mariko. He's going to be heading it up and working as a liaison with the appropriate people within the county and city, or whoever the individuals are. So thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it. First of all, I just wanted to mention something added on to what Jim said earlier with JJ talking about Colossal Cave, Mount Park, and the road. I've worked with Mr. Huckleberry, and we've talked about actually paving a portion of the road going into the park. So coming past, working with DOT on their project, the Parks Department will also fund a piece of that. We cannot afford to do the whole road system in the park, but our intent is to go ahead and help to fund a piece of that road reconstruction within the park itself up to the parking lot. Okay, so, it's not the one that's out here, okay? It's where the shooting range is on the south side, okay? Brecky Road and such. That is officially called the Southeast Regional Park. It's a lot noisier than the park that's out here. I mean, we have a lot of shooting, we have motorsports, we have a few other things going on in that park. So just for point of clarification, we usually refer to this, and the board has adopted the name, the Esmond Station Regional Park, for this particular park. So just a point of clarification. So if people say they want to go have a picnic at the Southeast Regional Park and sit at the table, it might be a little noisier than what you think. Yeah. So with that, just to give a brief introduction, to many of you know that we have, the county acquired, using 2004 bond funds, approximately 285 acres, pretty much surrounding this site here, the old Esmond Station, and it basically encircles from Houghton back over to Marianne, Cleveland. And that was at about a cost of $4.35 million. That was done about 6, 7, it takes a while when we go through state land to acquire property, but the county bid on the property and acquired that property to reserve as a regional park for the area, recognizing the needs in the future. So that was back in, I think we formally closed on that in 2013, and immediately after that time we launched into a master plan. We had a consulting firm that we hired to come up with a grand plan of how this should all be laid out. Now, the grand plan took approximately a year. There were some public meetings. Maybe some of you attended some of the public meetings in Vail to talk about and provide input into that plan. What did the community want as part of what was in this master plan? That master plan was actually published in 2014, and it basically had the over $69 million in improvements envisioned for this area. So a significant, huge regional park was envisioned by this master plan. Given the size of it, it had to be chunked up into phases. So the first phase was really some of the product that was going to be delivered here, hopefully very soon, and that was to be about $6.8 million in improvements. As Lucretia said, that was what was in the 2015 bonds, which failed, unfortunately. So that is typically how we fund significant amounts of park improvements, is with taxpayer-funded bonds. And if those bonds fail, then the Parks Department really only has money to maintain all of our existing facilities at the 155 sites that we have around the Pima County community. So just to frame that a little bit, again, it was $6.8 million. There was, based on what was being requested by the community and what was in the master plan, there was a chunk that was taken out to put in a few softball fields, a few soccer fields, a couple of playgrounds. There was a splash pad. There are all these great things that we thought, in the first phase would be a real good initiation of the park site here in this area. Instead, we had about a little over 150,000, I think it was, once the land was said and done, once the master plan was said and done, from the 2004 bonds. And you see the results of what we were able to do, which is a minimal amount of improvement here, where we did the walking path. It's about a 1-kilometer walking path all access, ADA compliant walking path. We have a drinking fountain that we put in. We put in a ramada. We put in those exercise stations around there too, because we're true believers in public health and wellness, and if people can walk around and take care of themselves a little bit, do some walking, not usually July or August in the middle of the day, but when it's nice out and that kind of thing. We figured it was a good, fairly inexpensive, fairly low maintenance kind of an improvement that we could do. So that sits out there now, and we designed it a little bit to add a few things in the future, to potentially add some playgrounds, to potentially add some a restroom at the site, but we just haven't had the money to execute those pieces going forward. So the grander master plan here is basically the first piece, the first phase. We can't even do that. The second and third and fourth phases were a lot more money, and we were hoping that it would stimulate interest. People would really, the community out here, as we know, is still growing dramatically, that it would continue to increase in desire, and we would get that public support for the bonds. But since the first phase did not pass, we're sort of stuck. We're where some of which were built back in 1929 from falling apart, old Civilian Conservation Corps things. So we have a lot of old facilities, and we continue to try to keep those safe for public use. We don't want to close them down. New facilities are fantastic for the community, but we do look for partnerships. We do look for other opportunities, other mechanisms to try to figure out how we can do things. Obviously, with a phased approach like this, if you're talking 6.8 million, that's way too much of a burden to put on anybody as far as a community, a partnership, unless you happen to know of somebody that can write us a $6.8 million check, which would be awful nice, because we'd love to do something like that. However, we could probably do some small improvements over time with the community input and community help and community assistance. Now, Lucretia had given me a few questions here about, one of the questions was, what would the Vail community need to do to fund a park for yourselves? Well, first thing would be raise a lot of money. The obvious question, the obvious answer to that question is it does cost a lot of money. And as the Parks Director, I'm still shocked at how much things cost. I mean, ball fields, a simple ball field with lights, how much that costs, whether it's a diamond field or whether it's a rectangular field, so football, soccer in the rectangular fields, rugby, or whether it's baseball, or whether it's softball in the diamond-shaped fields. Once you put in the lights and you put all the amenities in and you make it safe for consumption, it's a fairly significant chunk of change. There's also, in the base situation out here, there's a lot of infrastructure issues that we would have to take care of. Those were proposed in phase one. Water, electric, sewer, all these kinds of things that we needed to do to boost up the actual facility. They would have been all invisible to most people, but they still would have probably cost about $2 million out of that $6.8 million that was originally envisioned, because we have to bring that infrastructure up to prepare for the future in the growth of this park. So one of the things that was being discussed was possibility of an improvement district, which is one way that the community can get together and try to raise funds. These are really challenging, I must say, for a number of reasons. I'm not an expert on improvement districts, and as I told Lucretia, we might need to get somebody from finance in the room, and I believe some of your folks have talked to finance already about it. Naomi, okay. Yeah, because they're experts, they know what it is. There are county regulations, there are county requirements about how you have to go forward with this kind of a thing. Very, very regimented process. You do have to get 51% of the people to participate typically in an improvement district. The biggest problem with the regional park scenario is you have to draw the boundaries around who, effectively what it is you're voting to tax yourself to support the improvement. And you have to draw those boundaries, and you have to figure out where those boundaries are. Sometimes when you have a neighborhood park, it's fairly easy, because the neighborhood park is generally, the benefiting people are in that neighborhood, so they could more easily see the tangible benefits. Sometimes for regional parks, people come in from distance to actually participate and play at that park and whatever is done. So that makes it a little more complicated. Not to say it can't be done, but it's just a little more complex in how the structure needs to occur. So a corollary to that question was, how do you get it on the ballot? And that's a corollary for typically an improvement district or another bond, if there was a bond floated in the future to fund the improvements. I'm not hearing much, and I'm not sure, Supervisor Christie, if you're hearing anything, but I have not heard much about a county-supported bond. After the last one went down in flames pretty severely, I think the desire to move it forward is really, really not strong at this point in time, because the community support for a lot of improvement right now is not there. So I believe the county administrator is trying to switch to a pay-as-you-go kind of an approach, as opposed to debt, financed through bonds. So, but again, if we go through the process for an improvement district, I think ultimately that would get on a board agenda. I think the board would act on that, is the way it would work, if I recall correctly, my limited knowledge of these improvement districts. Another question was, how do we determine the cost for different components of the park here? And this is where we may want to say, okay, what is most important to the community? How does it fit into the master plan? Obviously, 6.8 million is an awful lot of improvement, but if everybody said, hey, this feature is really critical for our community, and you could raise some money through grants, or we could raise some money in the department here through grants, or we could fund it with some limited internal money. Like I said, I was telling you about the Colossal Cave Road. I have a limited amount of money, very, very small amount, that's got to be spread over the 9,186 square miles of Pima County. But we might be able to come up with something where we fund a small improvement out here, and we take an incremental fashion to adding things onto the park. That does take time, but we have past county experience on what it costs, so certainly we can provide that information to the community as far as what it costs us to build the certain features that you might want to consider. One question was about pickleball and tennis courts. There were no pickleball courts in the master plan initially. There were 4 tennis courts that were proposed. It was in a latter phase. We did some initial calculations because a question had come up recently in another area about how much it would cost to build a pickleball court. Again, it depends. What do you want with that pickleball court? Do you want restrooms? Do you want lights? Do you want bleachers? Do you want these kind of features and that kind of thing? All these things cost money, so you can add on or you can go with the bare bones. I think if we're talking about a bare bones, we're probably talking about $65,000, $75,000 per court to build. If we're talking lights and such, we're probably up around $100,000, $120,000 a court. So just for pickleball or for tennis courts. Tennis courts, obviously, a larger footprint, but similar amount of concrete probably to two pickleball courts. So we can look at those kind of things. What have other communities done who want to fund a park? Obviously, most of you are familiar with City of Tucson, and the City of Tucson has Purple Heart Park, as some of you probably know, which is only a mile and a half away from here. It's fairly close, over in the neighborhood to the west. Now that has a few ball fields, has a few baseball fields. I believe it has 1 softball field. I believe there's a swimming pool that's probably not currently active based on the last aerial photo I saw. It has a few other things at that park. And what the city has done is they floated a bond just for parks, as many of you recall, last November. I'm not sure who all voted for it, but it passed, $225 million. So the city has a lot of money over the next number of years to invest in their park system. In fact, I just looked it up on what they were doing for Purple Heart, and that they have an initial investment anticipated of $2.125 million for that park. So there were a bunch of things that they were proposing in the early stages and then some in the later stages. So some of these things, there will be some investment in that park just because of that bond financed kind of improvement. And those are the things that we often look towards and say, hey, if we have some money, we can build new amenities for the community. If we don't have that bond financed dollars, I can get small grants typically, but they're generally very small. I mean, you're not talking $5, $6 million grants. I'm talking $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 grants is what I can get typically. So it's very difficult to finance it And I don't want to be all gloom and doom and such, but that's pretty much the way it works. The good news is we have all this land here, we have a master plan, and we can come up with some things for the future, but it'll probably be the future before many things are built, just because of the cost, unless the community can come together and figure out a way to help to finance these, whether through an improvement district or something else.
Can you talk about, have you talked to anybody, is there anything you can say?
So,
Can you go?
so from my perspective, the only thing that I have done is spoken with finance of the Park and Recs Department just to see what steps we need to go through to start down this road of an improvement district. The complication, as can I call you Chris? As Chris has stated, is just us deciding how do we want to draw the boundaries. And as many of you have heard, I call all of us on this southeastern side the boroughs. So all the boroughs have to come together and say that we want this Esmond Station Regional Park. And if we want this, are we willing to pay for it? And what would that look like? It would have to be a phased approach, and we would have to get a group together, as we're about to do, to say, what are the things that we want that are most important? You know, do we just want to get a splash pad? Do we want to get a pickleball court? Or do we want a ramada with some picnic tables? You know, what does that look like? So we really have a lot of homework to do before we're able to really move down the road. But after the bond has failed, this is really the only and best option that we have for us to get a community center. For this area as a whole, Parks and Recs is the one thing that's missing that's really going to make this area a wholesome community. I think it's necessary. I think all of you feel it's necessary. So we just have to decide how important is it and how bad do we really want it.
Okay. Frank Graham again from Vail. How you doing, Mr. Tippett?
Doing well.
I tend to like barbecue tables or cookout tables. I'll talk to you a little bit later when it comes to that, sir. When it comes to the things that we want, these are the folks who sacrificed this evening, so I'm not sure how it works, but here's a couple questions I want to ask on everybody's behalf. If there isn't enough interest generated for a park, Esmond or elsewhere, is it possible that that potential funding could go somewhere else for security, safety type initiatives? Just asking.
So I can't answer for funds from Parks and Rec if that can be switched or moved to another area. So,
Not sure if we're trying to.
You know, personally, I think it's probably how you craft the question.
Okay.
So if you have the question more broad form,
Okay.
for what the improvement district would provide for the community,
Okay.
and you include those kind of things, I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be plausible at that point in time if it was stipulated in the original documents that you put together.
I mean, personally, I'm all for trying to do 1,000 bake sales and 1,000 car washes to raise whatever it takes, if that's what the majority of people want, is money generated by us to help leverage for that particular project or concept. I just didn't know if that was something we were sacrificing potentially. If we build a park, does it take away from some other things that if we don't build a park, we could satisfy?
So Frank, I understand what you're asking, and one of the reasons that we have the Southeast Regional Council, and then that is broken down even further to the, as I call them again, the boroughs. So there's a working group for each borough for us to prioritize what we think for our specific, neighborhood, what is important. So we would have to sit down and say, park or ... What does that look like?
Sure.
And again, each neighborhood at that level, I would say that's more of a micro level, is going to have varying things that they would be interested in
Right.
for that working group.
Okay.
But then when we all come together and we look at, what do we all, if we were to do our Venn diagram, Corona has these things, Del Lago has these things, and Rita Ranch has these things. But what do we all have in common? And that's what we're trying to focus on here in this area, and to say, is this Esmond Station Regional Park that common ground that we all have in common?
Okay, just so I am on the same page, just to clarify, we're trying to build those working groups in all the boroughs, or do we have that already?
We have them already.
They exist already.
exist.
On the sign-in sheet, one of the things that is asked is to identify what area that you're in. And so then you'll be passed along to J.J. Lamb is our Vale Working Group Chair, Glenn Taylor is our Corona Day Tucson Working Group Chair, and Rob Nemitz, who is behind the control room there, is our Southeast Tucson Working Group Chair. But the one for the Esmond
Esmond
Sta-
Station Regional
Esmond
Park.
Station Regional Park, and thank you for that correction, Chris, will have representatives from each one of those groups, not just one. We'll have to work together on it. Either it'll happen or not, but we have to work together if it's going to happen. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
I got an easy way to fund it. Take the 243 acres, sell 100 acres, and put a couple hotels out there that are self-sufficient, and you can pay for everything that you want.
Everything's on the table, as far as I'm concerned.
That land's sitting over here doing absolutely nothing for anybody. The cattle guys got kicked off, and on age-wise, on the pickleball, the original 10, soccer fields, the softball fields, and all that other stuff, when I asked about maintenance costs, I couldn't get an answer. So whenever this or anybody starts thinking about maintenance, somebody's got to pay for it. But I'd sell 100 acres off, put a couple hotels and more stuff out there.
And what you're saying, the conversation is kind of digressing here a little bit, but I will just say this. A hotel is something that we vastly need in this area. The Hampton Inn that's going on at Rita Road right now, I mean, it's great to this community, but it's just one. We need more. So innovation, creative ideas, collectively from this group, this is how we need to start thinking, to think outside the box. Not saying that that is the answer, but just creative, innovative ideas to say, how can we move forward?
I would just, as somebody who's from Illinois, I would just caution adding a bunch of special taxing districts here, because that's a deep hole, especially when you're talking about somebody else can raise your taxes without anybody voting for it. We just need to be careful.
Very well. And again, we have to do our homework, and we have to come together, get all the information, look at all the information, and say, do we want to present this to the community at large, and does it make sense? So, absolutely.
Yeah, I want to be clear. This is an exploratory group. This is not a group that has decided this is what's going to happen. It's a group to kind of see, is it an option? The group may decide, it's not worth pursuing any further because it's just not going to fly. But I think we need to ask the question, because too often the idea of a park comes up in our homes, in small groups, in other environments. We just need to be able to have an answer. So, okay. So if there aren't any other questions with regard to the park, we're done?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on. Chris, thank you so much. And Mariko, thank you for speaking as well. And then since we were talking about working groups earlier, I'm going to ask each one of the chairs of the Corona Day Tucson and the chair of the Vale Working Group, just kind of spend a couple of minutes, very high level, talking about the kind of things that they're doing. And then we're going to close. So, JJ, do you want to come up first, and then Glenn, you can come.
So I'll just say the small working groups are an opportunity for people to really focus on the smaller areas' specific needs. So the Vale Working Group has a quiet zone committee formed, and if there's anyone from the Vale Working Group who wants to be on that committee, let me know. And we also initiated that improvement district, and Mariko is heading that up with all of the groups. And we have a success story. The intersection at Camino Loma Alta and Old Spanish Trail has been a very dangerous intersection. Many near collisions, and a really serious one on the 21st of February. But Rick Bass and others have been advocating for some safety features there, and the county has double striped, and there are more sheriff patrols in the area. So that's a great start. So, and I would invite anyone here that's in the Vail area to please come to our next meetings. Let me know, and I'll add you to the email list.
So I guess I'm put on the spot here today. So the Corona Group has been working with a multitude of facets. Bill, as you heard, he's been very successful in helping us resolve a lot of Houghton Road issues. In fact, I give him credit. We've voiced our concern and would like to actually have gotten some designation road signs, and we did. And I have to give credit to Bill. That man steps up above and beyond anything that we can do. I give him a round of applause, people. So we're going to be getting some designation road signs because, well, we want our we want to know who we are. People come out to Corona, you just see that sign on I-10. Where is Corona? We don't know where Corona is. You drive 7 miles in the middle of nowhere and you hit a stoplight. Yeah. So now we have that. That's coming down the road. That's going to be put in. The road improvements are coming down the pipeline. We'll have to work with RTA further, as well as the joint effort between City of Tucson as Pima County to try and help alleviate the issues on Houghton Road. As for jurisdiction purposes for patrolling, that's something else we got to work on as well, due to the fact that the road is multitudes of jurisdictions between City of Tucson and Pima County itself. Other issues we have, and what we brought up, i.e., the road for Sarjeta, multiple people drive down Sarjeta as well too, going into work in Sarjeta or into Tucson. That is also being looked at, road conditions, road issues. Our biggest complaint where we live is roads. Right now I'm working shortly here with the actual planning commission to actually get more information on more homes as they're coming in. So that's something else I'm working on the sideline on. Any issues or problems you people see in Corona, feel free to talk. We're holding our meetings as a bi-monthly, so if you have questions, please see me. Okay?
Okay. I think that's pretty much a wrap. Is there any other question that anybody has about anything we've discussed today? Feel free to see me afterward, and I can see about getting the answers from the appropriate individuals. I want to thank everybody who showed up, our presenters to speak, and again, thank you guys for coming out on a lovely evening. So thank you. We'll see. The next meeting is July 25th, 6 to 8 in this room. We're going to have HSL Properties will be here, as well as Rosemont Mine, and of course others as well. So thank you guys.
Though it may not ever end, watch the stars and make your amends. You'll be fine by me, my friend. You